Kang Ho-young, after spending a decade in the US, lands back in South Korea, ready to dive into whatever his friend Joseph has planned for him. Spoiler alert, a blind date. At the restaurant, Ho-young is gearing up to meet his setup when fate or bad timing throws his first love, Lee Hongju, right into his path. Hongju, clearly not clocking who he is, assumes Ho-young is her blind date. Before he can clear up the confusion, his actual date, Oh Mi-soo, walks in, serving main character energy. Hongju bounces, thinking her real date is still somewhere out there waiting for her. Meanwhile, Mi-soo notices that Ho-young's gaze is stuck on Hongju. Curious, Mi-soo asks if they know each other. That's when she learns the tea. Ho-young and Hongju were high school classmates back in the day. Before long, Hongju heads out with her date, and Ho-young decides to follow, puzzled as to why she seems unable to recall him. Later, as they wrap up their separate dates, both Ho-young and Hongju head home. On his drive, Ho-young receives a call from Joseph, Mi-soo's brother, and apparent life coach, questioning why Ho-young cut the date short and pressing him to wrap up his affairs in Korea and return before the company's upcoming event. Joseph's reminder stirs up memories of Hongju for Ho-young, and he ends the call. While stuck in traffic, Ho-young spots Hongju waiting at a bus stop, which sends him into a flood of memories from their shared high school days, which hits him with a full K-drama flashback. Younger Hongju, all shy and adorable, handing him a love letter and nervously asking for a reply. Fast forward to the present, Ho-young tries to reconnect with her by calling out, hoping to catch her attention. But nope, Hongju's already ghosted the bus stop. Instead, he spots her grabbing a quick snack at a nearby tteokbokki stall and decides to approach her there. Trying to ease the tension, Hongju brings up their high school days, asking if he's still in touch with any of their old friends. She even takes his number. Smooth, right? And suggests he hit up the group while he's in town. As she talks about how much his friends must have missed him, Ho-young can't help but wonder if she's low-key including herself in that group. Disaster strikes. Hongju accidentally sprays fish broth all over his coat. Embarrassed, she quickly pays for the snacks, telling Ho-young to use the spare change for dry cleaning before rushing to catch her bus. Ho-young receives 500 won in change, cause that definitely covers it. Ho-young is left standing there with a soggy coat and a tiny coin, only to have the stall owner casually inform him that his car is being towed for illegal parking. Years ago in high school, Ho-young noticed Hongju for the first time when she was dozing off on the bus ride to school. The driver nudged him to wake her up. Once they arrived, Hongju, noticing Ho-young's injured ankle, saw a chance to get herself out of trouble for being late. She leaned on him like they were starring in some tragic romance, using him as her helpful excuse for being late. She slyly slipped her romance novel into his bag, hoping he wouldn't notice. When they got to school, their teacher punished Hongju for her tardiness. Ho-young skated by without so much as a side-eye, iconic behavior on her part. As Ho-young walked inside with a small, amused smile, Hongju fumed, annoyed at his easy escape. In math class later, Ho-young stumbled upon Hongju's romance novel in his bag. As he was looking at it, the teacher called him and asked him to solve a problem on the board. No big deal for the math genius, he crushed it effortlessly, earning the teacher's glowing praise as the brightest student. Meanwhile, Hongju was outside in the garden with her friend Haiji, who shyly confessed to having a crush on Ho-young. Hongju, still salty from their morning drama, brushed it off like, him? Rude much! But Haiji then asked Hongju to deliver a love letter to him on her behalf. Reluctantly, Hongju did as her friend asked, and asked Ho-young to respond. In the present, Hongju chats with Haiji about her recent run-in with Ho-young. Haiji, now rocking a bold new look that screamed glow-up since her school days, seizes the chance and asks Hongju to play matchmaker, hoping for an introduction to Ho-young. Curiously, Haiji also probes Hongju about her own dating life, wondering why she hasn't given romance another shot. The following day, Ho-young arrives at Rock Asset, where his uncle, Baek Wook, introduces him to the company staff. Baek, clearly having a proud uncle moment, hyped up Ho-young's math wizardry, like he was announcing the second coming of Einstein. However, Ho-young's mood is clouded by frustration over how Hongju had left him hanging the night before. Curious about Ho-young's foul mood, Baek is surprised to hear about his nephew's lingering feelings for his first love. Right then, the universe delivered another plot twist. A call from an unknown number, and to his surprise, it's Haiji, not Hongju on the other end. Haiji, clearly making moves, invites him to a casual gathering over drinks. Hoo-young agrees to meet Haiji, Hongju, and their mutual friend Sang-pil for a night out. At the reunion, Haiji arrives at Sang-pil's restaurant, glammed up in pink. Sang-pil, ever the comic relief, teases her about her transformation, threatening to spill the tea on her beauty upgrades to Hoo-young. Just as the two banter, Hoo-young arrives. Sang-pil warmly greets him with a hug, and the three start the night with drinks. Hoo-young, however, grows increasingly restless, clearly playing Where's Waldo in his head as he waits for Hongju to show up. Elsewhere, Hongju is unexpectedly delayed when her boss, producer Lee, asks her to deliver a gift to director Kim at an after-party. When she arrives, director Kim insists she joins the gathering and introduces her to Bang Junho, the author of her cherished high school romance novel and her adolescent crush. Hours pass, and back at the restaurant, Haiji gets drunk and is passed out on the table. Later, Hongju stumbles into Sang-pil's restaurant, tipsy. She starts to mention how she crossed paths with her first love, but gets sidetracked when Sang-pil offers her a taste of spicy chicken. Hoo-young watches her. Eventually, Sang-pil nudges Hoo-young to take Hongju home, noting they live nearby. As they walk together, their route takes them past their old high school, sparking memories of their first encounter. Hongju comments on how much more Hoo-young smiles now, contrasting it with his younger self, who, according to her, basically a robot with a perfect GPA. Hongju then suggests they try building a friendship now that they're adults, leaving Hoo-young with more questions than answers, and probably a slight identity crisis. Hoo-young agrees, and they continue their walk. Hongju, ever the philosopher, compares their situation to frozen food, best kept in the freezer because once it starts thawing, it risks spoiling unless fully enjoyed immediately. When they reach Hongju's house, she hands Hoo-young a bowl of her favorite ramen and a frozen snack as a thank you for walking her home. As she heads to her door, she notices Hoo-young lingering behind. With a slight smile, he points out that the frozen snack she gave him has already started thawing. Hongju wakes up, piecing together blurry memories of a night filled with drinks at director Kim's party, a visit to Sang-pil's restaurant, and the return of Junho. She got embarrassed, remembering moments with Hoo-young. Just then, Haiji arrives with food, eager to hear all the details. Elsewhere, Hoo-young has breakfast with his uncle, Baek, who hints at inviting Hongju, their neighbor, to join. Hoo-young immediately shuts it down with the subtlety of a slammed door, leaving Baek utterly confused. Back with Hongju, Haiji fumes over Junho's audacity to reappear after abandoning Hongju. Hongju tries to play it cool, saying she kept her emotions in check, though internally it stirred up more nostalgia than she'd like to admit. To lighten the mood, they indulge in pastries and chat about first loves. Hongju asks Haiji about Hoo-young, and Haiji, smitten by his looks, gets a teasing rebuttal from Hongju. A flashback reveals young Haiji's heartbreak when Hoo-young ignored her 10 love letters sent via Hongju. Frustrated, Hongju suggested a daring chalkboard confession. The result? Hoo-young silently erased it in front of their classmates, leaving Haiji crushed and Hongju facepalming into oblivion. Back in the present, Hongju jokes about Hoo-young's indifference, but Haiji, now confident and English fluent, is ready to call it destiny and chase Hoo-young all the way to the US. Meanwhile, Hoo-young convinces Baek to arrange an outing with Hongju. Baek asks Hongju to look after his visiting kid, implying Baek's niece. Hongju, blissfully unaware of Hoo-young's scheming, agrees. The next day, Hongju arrives at Baek's expecting a child, only to find Hoo-young waiting. Caught off guard but rolling with it, she takes him to an amusement park when Haiji conveniently ghosts her calls. At the amusement park, Hongju drags Hoo-young from ride to ride, watching with amusement as his serious CEO mode melts into something resembling actual fun. She occasionally tries calling Haiji, who is still busy trekking. Baek texts Hoo-young, clearly trying to stir the pot, teasing him about spending the day with his first love, Haiji. Ignoring the error, Hoo-young joins Hongju in a spicy ramen eating challenge, only to lose, agreeing to fulfill her dare, dressing in hanboks. Meanwhile, Haiji, hoping for a spa day, is dragged on a hike with her dad. On the trail, Mr. No helps her avoid a fall. Hongju and Hoo-young laugh and take photos. On the way back, rain starts pouring. In the car, Hongju scrolls through the photos and suggests that Hoo-young visit more often. Hoo-young detours to the Han River, hoping to share fried chicken, but they end up watching the view from the car due to the rain. In the car, Hoo-young and Hongju chat until she accidentally lowers her window, letting in rain. Hoo-young reaches over to help, and a moment lingers between them. Just as he seems about to kiss her, Hongju breaks the tension, asking to go home. When they reach Beck's, Hoo-young shields her from the rain, and she borrows an umbrella, agreeing to meet him again soon. In a flashback, Hongju confronts high school Hoo-young about ignoring Hae-ji's love letters. Hoo-young explains that silence was his way of letting Hae-ji down gently. The school soon hears of it, with Sang-pil teasing that Hoo-young secretly enjoyed Hongju's efforts. This idea sticks with Hoo-young, recalling the day he nudged a napping Hongju awake in the library and even left her a note to help her get the book she wanted. Back in the present, Hongju is assigned a new animation project at work, surprised to find that its writer is none other than Junho, the author of her favorite romance novel, and the man with a history of vanishing acts, attached as its writer. Flooded with memories of his unexplained departure 3 years ago, she decides to keep things strictly professional and tackle the project alone. At Rock Asset, Hoo-young informs Baek that he's extending his stay in South Korea, sidestepping his uncle's knowing look about his lingering feelings for his first love. After the meeting, Junho invites Hongju to a cafe, claiming he returned just for her and explaining he left to research a new novel. Hongju, still hurt, dismisses his words, saying it no longer matters. Junho argues they never officially broke up, implying they're still together. But Hongju, unbothered, serves him a reality check and rejects the idea. Just then, Hoo-young passes by, and Baek fills him in, revealing that Junho is the ex who broke Hongju's heart. Outside the cafe, Junho tries to hold Hongju's hand, urging her to listen, but she pulls away. Seeing this, Hoo-young channels his inner rom-com lead, grabs her hand, and boldly pretends to be her boyfriend. Relieved, Hongju follows his lead and walks away with him. In a flashback, a younger Hoo-young comforts Hongju over a bowl of ramen as she tearfully shares her worries about Junho's upcoming military service. Hongju plays along with Hoo-young's act as her boyfriend, holding his hand as they walk away from Junho, who watches until he finally leaves. Once clear, she thanks Hoo-young, hitting him with a "don't ask about my messy past" disclaimer, then heads back to work. At the office, Bae assigns Hongju to work on a presentation with Junho for their new project. Reluctant, she tries to decline, but Bae advises her to separate personal issues from work, reminding her that situations won't always be ideal. Over at Rock Asset, Hoo-young is surprised to learn Hongju's ex is Bang Junho, a writer she once idolized. In his car, Junho receives a scolding from his agent, who's annoyed he committed to an animation project for an incomplete novel. The agent points out the pain he caused Hongju by leaving abruptly, but Junho dismisses it, confident she'll come around, convinced his stories still have power over her. As Hongju reads Junho's new novel, memories resurface for her and Hoo-young, who recalls a high school incident with humor. In the flashback, young Hoo-young prepares for a math Olympiad interview, cheered on by staff, but then spots Hongju sneaking out to visit Junho at his military base. On a whim, he follows her, missing his own interview. Confronted by Hongju, he has no real reason for tagging along. When they reach the base, she declares she'll confess to Junho, leaving Hoo-young awkwardly questioning his motives. In the present, Baek, stunned by his nephew's attachment to Hongju, urges him to return to the US, perplexed that Hoo-young would stay in South Korea over an old crush. In the staff room, Mr. Son sits quietly as Hae-ji calls him outside, encouraging him to ask Hongju out again. But just as he seems ready to express feelings for Hae-ji instead, the bell rings and she has to leave, cutting their conversation short. That evening, Baek is annoyed to find Bee in his parking spot. Annoyed and done with everything, Baek storms into the office, drops Ho-young's promotion like a plot twist, and demands his nephew head back to the US immediately. Preferably yesterday. Hoo-young declines and goes for a walk to clear his head, running into Hongju, who invites him out for fried chicken. Hae-ji joins them. As they talk, Hoo-young starts to mention how he helped fend off Junho, but Hongju cuts him off. Annoyed, he calls her stupid and clueless like in high school, upsetting her enough to leave him with Hae-ji. Hae-ji asks if Hongju knows he likes her, and later, disappointed, reflects on the fateful connection between them. Meanwhile, Hongju visits Sang-pil, who warns her about working with Junho. At the chicken place, Hae-ji urges Hoo-young to consider whether he's staying in Korea solely for Hongju, warning him to be cautious with her feelings if he's unsure. Later, Hoo-young questions his decision to stay, while Hongju, at home, finds a box of her early animations inspired by Junho's novels. Reminded of how Bae believed in her, she decides to recommit to the upcoming 10th anniversary project with Junho. Hoo-young, however, resolves to leave for the US without saying goodbye to Hongju. At school, Hye-ji doesn't mention her evening with Hoo-young to Hongju, but confides in Mr. Son about her crush on someone interested in her best friend. He suggests letting her friend be happy, making her smile, and promising to set him up on a better blind date. As Hoo-young heads to the airport, memories from high school flood back. He recalls comforting Hongju after her failed attempt to give Junho a love letter. In classic Hoo-young fashion, he tried to cheer her up with spicy ramen, because nothing says feel better like food that makes you cry harder. She vowed to confess to Junho, and Hoo-young, teasing her, joked about reporting her for trying to date an older soldier. Their playful exchange ended with him promising to take her to the army base to see Junho. That night, Hoo-young persuaded a guard to disclose Junho's posting location. While running to catch a bus back, Hongju tripped, and Hoo-young chose to stay by her side, letting the bus go. Back in the present, as Hoo-young heads to the airport, Hye-ji calls to inform him that Hongju has been in a car accident. He immediately turns around and rushes to the hospital, claiming to be her guardian to get information on her condition. He learns she's injured her left arm. In her hospital room, a flashback shows young Hongju overhearing her uncle suggesting she be put in an orphanage since they're expecting their own child. Later, in high school, she had resisted help from the school doctor despite feeling unwell until a classmate handed her a glass of water. Back in the present, Hoo-young watches over Hongju as she wakes up. She downplays the accident and apologizes for the trouble. Frustrated, Hoo-young takes her hand, pressing it to his chest. With his hand over her own, Hoo-young presses Hongju's palm to his chest, asking her to feel just how worried he is after her accident. The quiet moment is interrupted by the doctor, who arrives to check on Hongju and suggests an MRI scan to be cautious. Despite her reluctance, she agrees, all the while wondering if Hoo-young's gestures are his way of flirting. Meanwhile, back at school, Hye-ji rushes to inform her father, the vice principal Mr. Kim, about Hongju's accident and requests a half-day leave to visit her. Insistence on her safety, Mr. Kim asks Mr. Son to drive her to the hospital, and though she initially protests, she eventually gives in, clearly valuing Hongju over her pride. Outside the hospital, Mr. Son notices Hye-ji's heels and offers his spare running shoes to keep her from tripping. Touched by his thoughtfulness, Hye-ji thanks him and hurries inside. At the hospital, Baek shows up after receiving Hoo-young's luggage from a taxi driver. When he bumps into Hye-ji and hears about Hongju's accident, he's relieved to learn that she's being discharged. As Hoo-young escorts Hongju outside, she tells him to stop acting flirtatious, leaving him puzzled. Once they're out, Hongju finds Hye-ji waiting, who checks on her and assures her everything's fine. At the same time, Baek reprimands Hoo-young for missing his US flight. Outside, Hye-ji pulls Hongju aside and announces that she's dating Mr. Son, nudging Hongju to go home with Hoo-young. Adding to the plan, Baek conveniently asks Mr. Son to drop him at his office as well. Hongju heads home with Hoo-young. On the drive, she feigns sleep to avoid conversation, but wakes when her phone rings with a work call. Meanwhile, Baek playfully praises Mr. Son for his Oscar-worthy performance as Hye-ji's boyfriend, leaving Mr. Son smiling awkwardly. In the car, Hongju takes a playful jab at Hoo-young, accusing him of shirking his job when he declines a call from his mother, who is also his boss. Laughing, Hoo-young reminds her how she used to skip school to chase after Junho, pointing out her own history of playing hooky. In a flashback, young Hoo-young and Hongju find themselves stranded after missing the last bus. Hongju suggests catching a cab to the nearest bus depot, but their luck takes a nosedive, literally, when Hoo-young stumbles straight into a pit. Rushing over to help, Hongju bursts into laughter at his clumsiness. She tries to pull him out, but he slips again, leading them both into the pit. Suddenly, a frog startles Hoo-young, and he instinctively hugs Hongju, though he quickly brushes it off when she laughs at his reaction. In the present, Hongju laughs to herself, remembering the moment and remarks to Hoo-young that she's left all her old memories with Junho behind. Hoo-young, a bit disheartened, points out that the memory she recalled was of their own time together, not with Junho. Outside her place, he offers to help her up the stairs, but she insists on doing it alone with her crutches. As she nearly loses her balance, Hoo-young catches her just in time. Taking her to rest at his uncle's house, Hoo-young heads out to buy medicine and some food for her. Meanwhile, Hye-ji, Mr. Son, and Baek arrive at Sang-pil's restaurant and catch him up on the recent events. Hye-ji becomes annoyed when she learns that Sang-pil has known about Hoo-young's crush on Hongju since high school. Clearly feeling late to the gossip train, Sang-pil, noticing how attentive Mr. Son is toward Hye-ji, silently acknowledges the budding dynamic, but keeps his observations to himself. After all, meddling isn't exactly his style. except when it is. Back at Baek's house, Hongju drifts off and dreams of kissing Hoo-young, jolting herself awake with embarrassment. Trying to shake off her thoughts, she crawls up the stairs rather than using her crutches, a decision she immediately regrets when Hoo-young walks in and scoops her up. He hands her some porridge and reminds her to take her medicine before resting. Grateful, Hongju thanks Hoo-young, hinting that his help is especially meaningful given that they weren't close back in high school. Ouch! Hurt by her words, Hoo-young leaves abruptly, leaving her to wonder if she crossed a line. Alone at his uncle's house, Hoo-young reflects on her comment, wondering how many times she'll dismiss his feelings. Just then, he receives a call from his friend Joseph, who asks him to return to Korea. Hoo-young tells Joseph he has no intention of going back, picking up a business card Hongju had accidentally dropped. At the same time, Junho is reading a fan letter Hongju had once sent him, triggering memories from 4 years ago. In the flashback, Hongju had joined him for an interview celebrating his success. When asked whom he wanted to thank, Junho glanced at the sleepy Hongju and credited an acquaintance who had been a steady support, subtly hinting at her. Subtlety, however, wasn't Junho's strong suit, as his lingering gaze was less hint and more obvious billboard. As the interviewer pressed further, asking if he was dating, Junho replied that he was, while his gaze lingered on Hongju as she dozed at the table. In the present, Junho's publicist finds him watching an anime series Hongju had produced. Junho admits he's worried she may not accept the collaborative project, and Minwoo bluntly suggests he should have been honest with her about why he vanished 3 years ago. Junho, feeling the weight of his past decisions, confides to Minwoo that he hid the truth from his ex-girlfriend about the financial struggles and writer's block brought on by panic attacks. He's visibly relieved when Minwoo informs him that Hongju has agreed to collaborate on the project. Elsewhere, Hoo-young holds Hongju's business card, puzzled by her insistence that they were never close. Memories flood back to the time they were stuck in a pipeline, passing time by sharing secrets to keep each other awake. Hongju had confessed her true dream of becoming an animation director, admitting she was only studying math to meet her family's expectations. Moved, she'd vowed to pursue animation to fulfill his dream, even jokingly promising him 5% of her salary once she succeeded. Not a bad deal, Hoo-young had teased back then, already planning how to spend it. Returning to the present, Hongju wakes to text from Haiji and Sangpil in their group chat, checking on her recovery. Just as Haiji invites Hoo-young into the chat, Hongju, distracted by hunger, posts about needing food before adding him. Hoo-young promptly invites her over for breakfast, preparing an elaborate spread with help from Haiji and Sangpil. His efforts pay off when Hongju enjoys the meal. During breakfast, Hoo-young cheekily reminds her of her 5% promise from their high school days, suggesting she now owes him a percentage of her earnings as an animation producer. Back pay included, he jokes, earning a laugh as Hongju fumbles for excuses to dodge the payment. The conversation turns to her job, and Hongju's eyes light up as she describes the pride of seeing her name in the credits. She invites Hoo-young to watch one of her produced anime with her, planning to retrieve her laptop from home until Junho unexpectedly arrives. Junho, learning of Hongju's accident from her office, grows angry upon seeing her with Hoo-young. Accusing her of not taking their project seriously, he lashes out. Hoo-young steps forward, clearly ready to escalate things, but Hongju holds him back with a calm glare that says, "Not today," challenging Junho to cancel the project if he doubts her commitment. She asserts that she's changed since their breakup and asks him to keep his distance. Afterward, Hongju retreats to her apartment, feeling shaken as she watches Junho drive away. Hoo-young, sensing her distress, follows her and sits beside her by the door. To her surprise, he admits he's secretly glad her relationship with Junho didn't work out, hinting at his long-standing feelings. Gently, he encourages her to heal both from her physical injury and her heartbreak before leaning in to kiss her. In a flashback high school, Hongju's heart flutters when Hoo-young dozes off on her shoulder during their time stuck in the pit, revealing that their connection had quietly started to grow even then. In a flashback, a younger Hoo-young stands at the bus stop after school, waiting as usual. Just then, he receives a message from his mother, urging him to come home quickly because they're moving to the USA. Realizing his whole world was about to change, he boarded the bus without waiting for Hongju, who was crossing the street to meet him, leaving behind a bittersweet memory. Returning to the present, Hoo-young kissed Hongju and confessed that he's liked her since high school. Embarrassed and flustered, Hongju quickly asks him to go home. Trying to process the moment, she heads over to Sangpil's restaurant, hoping to distract herself. Meanwhile, Baek and Bae get into a public spat over the parking situation. As Bae's staff whispered about how Baek owned the building a sore point for Bae, Baek took things up a notch, accusing her of holding a grudge because of his past rejection of her feelings. Talk about airing dirty laundry in public. Later that evening, Baek reminds Hoo-young of his looming flight back to the USA, but Hoo-young is preoccupied with thoughts of Hongju. Elsewhere, Hye-ji finds a moment to thank Mr. Son for lending her his sneakers at the hospital. Trying to deflect the attention, Mr. Son awkwardly revealed that her father, Mr. Kim, had tasked him with organizing a staff hiking trip, clearly a job he wasn't thrilled about. At Sangpil's restaurant, Hongju got stressed, still replaying Hoo-young's confession in her mind. At the same time, Hoo-young can't stop smiling, thinking about his admission to her. Curious about her whereabouts, he texts Sangpil, who mentions that Hongju is at his restaurant. Without hesitation, Hoo-young heads over, but Hongju, learning of his impending arrival, leaves the restaurant. She finds herself sitting at the bus stop, lost in memories of her younger self, trying to cross the street to reach Hoo-young. Meanwhile, a drunken Junho bombards her phone with messages, telling her how much he misses her. Absorbed in her reflections on high school, Hongju ignores his texts. The next morning, Sangpil appears at Hongju's doorstep, insisting she get ready for a day trip with Hoo-young and Baek. When Hongju hesitates, Sangpil convinces her by saying that Hye-ji and Mr. Son will also be joining. Hongju, unable to outmatch Sangpil's persistence, reluctantly agreed. During the drive to the seaside, Hoo-young finds a seat next to Hongju, trying his best to engage her in conversation despite her attempts to brush him off. When he's asked to take over driving, Hongju ends up stuck in the front seat beside him, with Baek and Sangpil fast asleep in the back. At one point, Hoo-young asks her to feed him some snacks, but she refuses, telling him to manage on his own. Once they arrive at their destination, Baek and Sangpil head off to fish, while Hongju and Hoo-young settle into the rented cabin. They share a quiet, charged moment as they arrange their belongings, but Hongju, overwhelmed, pulls away and steps outside. Later, while Hongju sits with Baek, she receives a message from Bae, informing her that Junho has requested for their animation project meetings to take place at his house. Flashbacks reveal Bae reluctantly agreeing to this condition after a discussion with Junho's publicist, Min-woo, who cited Junho's desire for comfort. Frustrated, Hongju excuses herself and takes a walk along the shore, only for Hoo-young to rush after her, warning her to stay safe as high tide approaches. Playfully, Hongju persuades Hoo-young to join her in fishing for quirky sea creatures like oysters, sea cucumbers, and octopuses. Meanwhile, Hye-ji and Mr. Son are on their way to join the group. During the drive, Hye-ji attempts to chat, but Mr. Son remains distant. When her sister calls, Hye-ji learns that Mr. Kim has arranged a blind date between Mr. Son and her sister. Heartbroken, Hye-ji directly asked Mr. Son if he'd rather date her instead, only to receive a firm rejection that left her shaken. As Hongju and Hoo-young attempted to fish, they came close to sharing a kiss. Hongju hesitates, pulling back at the last second. Hoo-young, ever the tease, made light of her reaction, enjoying the moment. Later that night, noticing her friend's mood, Hongju takes Hye-ji aside for a private walk, where Hye-ji confides that she had pretended to be Mr. Son's girlfriend, but had unexpectedly developed real feelings for him. Despite his rejection, she's determined to pursue him, a resolve that inspires Hongju to face her own feelings for Hoo-young. That evening, the group gathers for dinner and drinks. After, as Hongju drifts off to sleep, she dreams of people from her past, her mother, aunt, and Junho, each walking away from her. In the dream, Hoo-young appears, asking if she would let him walk away too. The next morning, Hongju wakes alone in the rental house, panicking when she finds no one around, and her calls go unanswered. Just as she grows anxious, Hoo-young returns with breakfast and coffee, explaining with a cheeky grin that he'd stepped out to surprise her. And as he plates breakfast, Hongju admits she doesn't want him to leave for the USA. Smiling, Hoo-young reassures her that he has no intention of going anywhere. Then Hongju leans in and kisses him. 3 years prior, Junho boarded his flight, tearfully promising himself that he'd return after achieving success as an author, hoping that Hongju, like the heroine in his novels, would still be waiting. As Hongju and Hoo-young share a tender moment, they confess their feelings for each other. Hoo-young takes her out for a meal, reassuring her when she feels a bit shy. Later, as they return to Seoul, Hoo-young ignores Baek's persistent calls, hoping to spend more time with Hongju. But the peaceful vibe ends when Hoo-young decides to face Baek, who demands answers like an interrogator. Inside, Baek presses Hoo-young about his sudden resignation from his US job, revealing that Hoo-young's mother had asked him to investigate. Firmly, Hoo-young explains that he won't return to the States, confessing his commitment to staying with Hongju. Despite his uncle's disapproval, Hoo-young stands by his decision. Later that night, Joseph calls from the US, curious about Hoo-young's unexpected resignation. With a smile, Hoo-young simply chalks it up to serendipity. He calls Hongju, but she playfully declines his invitation, saying she's already in bed. Their flirtatious exchange ends on a light note as they both say goodnight. The next day, Hoo-young finds that Hongju is off on a girls' day with Hae-ji, who is getting her hair permed for an upcoming hiking trip with her dad and Mr. Son. That evening, the two friends meet at Sang-pil's restaurant, where Sang-pil almost lets slip about Hongju's contract with Junho before Hongju stops him with a playful attack. Meanwhile, Hoo-young anxiously waits for a chance to see her. Later, Hongju shows up with a tipsy Baek, who's feeling nostalgic, attempting to drunk dial his ex. Unbeknownst to him, it's her boss, Bae, and she handles the conversation, unaware of the connection. After dropping Baek at home, Hoo-young finally meets up with Hongju and compliments her new hair, officially asking her out on a date the following day. The next morning, both Hongju and Hoo-young excitedly prepared for their date. Meanwhile, Hae-ji gets ready for the trek with her father and Mr. Son, only to find out that Mr. Son is unwell and won't be joining them. Frustrated, she attempts to share her feelings about him with her father, but he dismisses her, leaving her feeling deflated. With her plans cancelled, Hae-ji decides to join Hongju and Hoo-young on their date, inadvertently interrupting the couple's time at a cafe. Sitting hand in hand with Hongju, Hoo-young senses Hae-ji's discomfort and suggests she go check on Mr. Son. Meanwhile, Mr. Son, feeling slightly better, gets up to grab a snack and notices a text from Hae-ji, contemplating how to respond. Just then, Mr. Son's mother drops by to check on him, expressing her concerns about his single status. As he steps outside to hail a cab for her, Hae-ji arrives, accidentally meeting his mother, who immediately takes a liking to her as a potential match for her son. Mr. Son's mother, already primed to push her son toward marriage, subtly hints at her approval of Hae-ji as a suitable partner. Mr. Son's mother engages Hae-ji in a somewhat embarrassing conversation about the strong fertility genes of the Son family, causing Mr. Son to be uncomfortable. Mortified, he sends his mother away, leaving Hae-ji confused by the awkwardness. After she leaves, Hae-ji offers to help Mr. Son get home, but he, still embarrassed, pushes her arm off. Hurt, Hae-ji interprets his action as a rejection and returns home feeling disheartened. Meanwhile, Junho visits his uncle, Mr. Kim, who surprises him by revealing that Hoo-young was once his high school student. As they discuss Junho's breakup with Hongju, Mr. Kim advises his nephew to let her move on after everything she endured because of him. Junho, dismayed by his uncle's blunt stance, leaves feeling unsettled. Elsewhere, Hoo-young and Hongju steal glances at each other as he drives them to an art gallery. At one point, Hoo-young reveals how his heart races whenever she calls him by name, confessing he's liked her since high school and still feels the same way. Their date is interrupted by an urgent call from Baek, summoning Hoo-young home. He drops Hongju off but promises to meet her again the next evening. Back home, Hongju rummages through her keepsakes from high school and stumbles upon an old essay on ambition where she had included Hoo-young's dreams after their heart-to-heart in the pit. She reads it with a nostalgic smile, remembering the bond they once shared. Meanwhile, Hoo-young arrives at his mother's hotel room, where a tense conversation unfolds. Despite her attempts to convince him, Hoo-young firmly states he has no intention of returning to the US frustrated. His mother refuses to accept his decision. The next day, Hae-ji returns Mr. Son's cleaned shoes, trying to act polite and formal, which throws him off even more. As Hongju prepares for her first workday at Junho's house, she plans to meet Hoo-young beforehand, only to find he's unavailable. She waits at the bus stop, worried about him, while Hoo-young heads to Rockasset with his mother. From the car, Do-seon spots Hongju at the bus stop and recognizes her as the girl she met a decade ago. Mr. Son tries to apologize for his earlier coldness but fumbles, leaving Hae-ji even more hurt as she vows not to burden him with her feelings again. Hongju arrives at Junho's house, taking her seat at the desk and steeling herself for a day of work. At Rockasset, Baek is on edge due to Hoo-young's mother's presence, especially when she casually announces she's planning to move to South Korea now that Hoo-young has resigned. Meanwhile, Junho wants to open up about his struggles with panic attacks and mental health issues to help Hongju understand what led to their breakup. However, Hongju doesn't pick up on the subtle hints he's dropped through shared memories. When Junho suggests they work together a bit longer, she declines and prepares to leave, only to witness him collapse from an anxiety attack. In a flashback from 10 years ago, Hu Yong is at the bus stop, waiting across from Hongju. He receives a sudden call from his mother, informing him of their move to the USA. Torn, he boards the bus just as Hongju begins to cross the street. Nearby, Hu Yong's mother watches her son from her car, noting his glance toward Hongju. When Hongju reaches the stop, she feels a pang of disappointment at finding Hu Yong gone. His mother approaches, handing her some anime CDs that Hu Yong had left behind, but the interaction strikes Hongju as strange, and she leaves, feeling unsettled. As Junho nearly faints, Hongju quickly grabs him, steadying him as she checks if he's okay. Junho finally opens up, explaining that the breakup stemmed from his illness. He admits he struggled to write due to intense anxiety and couldn't bring himself to show his vulnerability to her in the past. Thanking him for being honest, Hongju tells Junho that she spent years thinking their breakup was her fault. Now, understanding the real reason, she feels a weight lifted, knowing she can let go and stop blaming herself. Meanwhile, Hu Yong's mother tells Hu Yong she plans to stay in South Korea as well, challenging him to reconsider moving back to the USA. Firm in his decision, Hu Yong tells her he's staying for good, leaving Baek stunned by his defiance. Hongju returns to work and informs Bae that she can no longer work on Junho's project due to personal reasons. Sensing her distress, Bae supports her choice and allows her to step away. Hongju stops by a convenience store, where she shoos away a few high schoolers in frustration. Just then, Hu Yong arrives, and she rushes into his arms for comfort. They spend the evening unwinding at an arcade, playing games and singing karaoke to lift their spirits. At one point, Hongju catches herself thinking that Hu Yong's singing voice is surprisingly attractive. As they walk home, Hu Yong confides that he quit his job, which initially worries Hongju. However, he asks her to trust him, and she agrees, reassured by his confidence. Back at home, Hongju chats with Haiji, who shares her disappointment over being rejected by Mr. Son, and confesses she even bought trekking shoes hoping to impress him. After the call, Hongju gathers all of Junho's novels and deletes any files related to him from her laptop. Determined to fully move on, she places the books by her trash can outside. The next morning, Hu Yong notices the novels while out on his jog, recognizing them from their high school days. When Hongju later leaves for work, she's surprised to see the books are gone. Just then, Hu Yong returns and offers to walk her to the bus stop. But as they're about to leave, his mother steps out of a cab. Politely, Hongju introduces herself to her, only for her to request a private conversation with her son. Inside, Hu Yong's mother confronts Baek about renovating and occupying her property without permission, announcing that she'll be moving in with them, much to his frustration. Baek sends a warning text to Hongju. At work, Bae senses Hongju's low spirits and distracts her with tasks to keep her focused. That evening, Hongju carefully heads home, hoping to avoid any run-ins with Hu Yong's mother. Outside, Hu Yong meets her, and they share a quiet romantic conversation under the evening sky. The next day, Hu Yong stops by Sangpil's restaurant for a meal, but ends up stuck helping as a temporary waiter. Despite being clumsy and breaking a few bowls, he uses his math skills to help Sangpil manage the cash register. Meanwhile, at Rock Asset, Baek confronts his sister, frustrated with her meddling, and attempts to control his staff. He accuses her of exerting power over others, because she's no longer able to control Hu Yong. Later that day, Hongju visits the same tteokbokki stall she and Hu Yong used to go to when they were younger. She sends Hu Yong a playful text about her chat with the shop owner, keeping the memory alive. That evening, Baek and Bae engage in a heated argument. Meanwhile, outside Hongju's house, Junho arrives, throwing paper planes made from old love letters she'd once written to him. Hongju tries to convince him to leave, but he continues tossing letters, one landing on Hu Yong's mother, who has just returned home. As she picks up the note, Junho pointedly asks Hongju if Hu Yong is a good man, urging her to confront her feelings and accept their breakup. Hongju begins collecting the scattered love letters and runs into Hu Yong's mother, who then invites her in for tea. Meanwhile, at Sangpil's, Haiji and Sangpil discuss Hongju's situation with Junho. unaware that Hu Yong is nearby, overhearing. Upset, he quietly leaves and returns home. During their conversation, Hu Yong's mother bluntly states her intentions to bring Hu Yong back to the USA, accusing Hongju of keeping him tied down. Shocked, Hongju explains how she grew to love Hu Yong for the kindness he showed her, only for his mother to imply that Hu Yong's charm has drawn in many girls before, leaving Hongju feeling uncertain and hurt. Hu Yong stumbles upon one of Hongju's old love letters to Junho. Pocketing it, he goes to find her, only to encounter a visibly distressed Hongju, who's upset over learning about his past dating life in the States. Hu Yong and Hongju's tension reaches a breaking point when she admits her doubts, telling him she can't fully trust him. Fearing he'll leave her, stung, they argue, and Hu Yong eventually drowns his frustrations in drink. The next morning, he wakes on the couch, his mother noticing his rough state and feeling a pang of concern. Hongju opens up to Hyeji, admitting she's been pushing Hu Yong away, worried he might leave for the US again. Meanwhile, Sangpil visits Hu Yong, preparing him a meal and reminiscing over drinks. Sangpil recalls how Hongju would get deeply saddened whenever someone left, emphasizing how meaningful goodbyes are to her. Later, back at school, Hyeji has a close call when a stray football heads her way. Mr. Son steps in just in time, taking the hit and ending up with a nosebleed. Concerned, Hyeji checks on him in the medical room, where Mr. Son finally confesses his feelings, and the two share a kiss. That night, Hu Yong's mother returns home to find Sangpil drunk and Hu Yong nowhere in sight. She tracks down Hongju, only to see her son waiting outside her house. Hu Yong confronts his mother, expressing his deep love for Hongju and his frustration over how she made Hongju doubt herself. He also admits the pain he felt after moving to the US as a teenager, realizing how much he missed his family and his old life. As Hongju heads home from work, she nearly collides with a speeding bike, only to have Hu Yong pull her out of harm's way just in time. A flashback shows Hongju and Hyeji's childhood, sharing a simple meal at the tteokbokki stall. When Sangpil arrives and mentions Hu Yong, young Hongju tears up. Back to the present, as they stand on the street they reconciled, sharing apologies and feelings. That evening they went home together, cooking ramen, laughing and reminiscing about old times and his US years, with Hu Yong quietly expressing hopes of a future with her. The next morning, they encountered Hu Yong's mother, who ignored Hongju's greeting. Undeterred, Hongju followed her, eventually apologizing and affirming her intent to love his family as much as she loved him. Meanwhile, Hu Yong's mother spoke with Baek, who insisted on keeping Hu Yong under his guidance. Hyeji, feeling frustrated, confronted Mr. Son about keeping their relationship secret. He cited gossip as a reason, but when she held his hand, he quickly withdrew, leaving her disappointed. As Hu Yong and Hongju read manga together, Hongju's thoughts drifted to high school memories, recalling the strong connection she'd felt watching him play on the school grounds. The next morning, snow covered the streets. When Hongju answered the door, expecting Hu Yong, she was surprised to find his mother instead. Inviting her inside, she listened as his mother offered her money, urging her to leave South Korea and join them in the US. Afterward, Hu Yong's mother confronted him, revealing that she had filed a lawsuit against him for allegedly breaking company policy. Meanwhile, Hongju wandered through the snowy streets, replaying her tense conversation with his mother. She eventually crossed paths with Mr. Kim, her high school principal, who had raised her. Over a meal, she confided in him, and he was startled to learn she was dating his prized math student. Annoyed, he admitted he would have objected if he'd known sooner. Feeling pressured, Hu Yong agreed to return to the US pleased. His mother left for America, hoping he'd join her soon. Yet, as soon as she departed, he went searching for Hongju, only to find her house empty. Elsewhere, Hyeji grew upset when Mr. Son didn't respond to her texts. Determined, she stormed off, her heel catching on a wooden plank in front of a gathering crowd. Mr. Son appeared just in time, helped her with her shoe, and boldly announced their engagement, even winning Mr. Kim's approval. Baek went to Sangpil, and with his help, he sat next to Bae. Bae got up to leave, but Baek asked her to stay and they decided to eat together. Eventually, Hu Yong and Hongju met again at their old high school. While strolling, he urged her to join him abroad, but she explained her commitment to her life in South Korea. Reassuring her, he promised to return once things were settled in the US, and they embraced, cherishing the moments they had left. In the following weeks, Hongju focused on her animation career, working tirelessly. As Christmas approached, she and Hoo Young enjoyed a warm evening decorating their Christmas tree, laughing and sharing playful moments. Later, Haiji shared her worries with Hongju, suggesting it wasn't fair to wait endlessly for Hoo Young with no clear return date. But Hongju, firm in her feelings, reassured her that she was willing to wait as long as needed. On Christmas Eve, Haiji, Mr. Son and Sangpil arranged a farewell gathering at Hoo Young's uncle's house. Unfortunately, Hongju was too tied up with work to attend, disappointing Hoo Young, who had hoped to see her one last time. The next day, Hoo Young headed to the airport alone, preparing for his departure. Just as he was about to check in, he was stunned to see Hongju beside him with a suitcase. She had saved her vacation days in secret to spend the holidays with him in the US, wanting this moment to be theirs alone. Filled with emotion, Hoo Young embraced her tightly. A flashback brought memories of their high school days, with shared looks and silent connections. Hand in hand, they walked together to board the flight, ready to start this new chapter side by side. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.